Let's go ahead and throw this out there. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get my chat up. Huh. All right, where's my chat at? There we go. Let's make sure that this looks good here. Are we live? I think we're live. All right. Okay. And then let's go ahead and get some posts going. Ba-boom. All right, one post down, 3 to go. Oh, wrong one. Still got a minute and a half left, and then we'll get started on this. All right. Right. I'm going to post this over in a Slack channel as well. Got 55 seconds. Okay, with that, I think we're ready to go. Let me just pull the comments over. Oh, wait, there's one other thing. One other thing. Just a moment. All right, chat's open. Let me pull it over here so I can see it while we go. And we'll go ahead and get started. All right, well, hello, and welcome back. Today we're going over authentication in Proxmox, 2FA, MFA, TFA as they call it actually, and particularly WebAuthn. That's what I'm really interested in and excited to show. And it has a bit of nuance to it because that's where you have the most trouble in terms of potentially locking yourself out. So with that all said, got a little bit of notes here I'm going to go through. So first of all, when we're talking about WebAuthn, you have to have Acme enabled first. So Let's Encrypt. You have to have, or some other method by which you have valid HTTPS certificates. This is at the layer of the browser. The browser is what cares. It's not Proxmox that cares. It's the browser that cares. If the browser doesn't seed valid certs, it's not going to enable that API to be used. And then the, say, iCloud keychain is a layer above that. When it comes to setting this up, if you do it wrong, you can lock yourself out. So there's kind of a process that you want to follow. So I'm just going to review. We went in the last segment, we went over how do you set up Acme Let's Encrypt, but we're going to go over that again just briefly, just to touch on it so that we have that covered. So there's two places. Under Data Center, you go down to Acme. First, you can create an account. This just requires an email address. You can see that I've already done that here. And then you accept the terms of service. Only Let's Encrypt is supported. The other Acme providers are not supported at this time. And then you're going to need a challenge plugin. Typically, you need a DNS challenge plugin because you are dealing with private IP addresses. If it's public, you can use an HTTPS method or HTTP challenge method, and you don't need to do the challenge plugin. But typically you do need to do that. And so you would give it some sort of name. I typically do the name of the plugin. So for example, name.com, the root company, because that's the account that I'd be using it under. And then you choose which API that you want to use. So for example, name.com. So I typically name the plugin ID the same, the API ID and then the account ID. That's just convention I use. And then there's the data that you put in, and we talked about that last time. So you look that up in the acme.sh documentation, and you follow that format without the export in front. Okay, so with that done, having the account and the challenge plugin, then you can go over to the node, and then you can go into certificates under system. And then here is where first you have to change the account. So using account, you have to select the account that you set up at the data center layer. And then you have to click apply. And this apply could be off screen depending on what your size is set at. So when I first did it, let's see, it's not a problem here, but when I first did it, I actually had a problem because the apply button was off the side of the screen and I couldn't see it. So then you add the domain. So you go in here, you select DNS, select your plugin that you used, and then you put in your domain. And what we're concerned with here is that this is the domain of the node that you're going to use to access it, that you'll use it for WebAuthn. You can actually have multiple domains here, but only one can be valid for WebAuthn. So you can see the domains listed, and then you click on order certificates. You wait about 30 seconds. It has a progress bar. It shows you. Okay. So that's the Acme part. You'll close out your browser, or at least close out every single tab that has any reference to this server by its IP address or any of its domain names. Then when you open it up again, you don't have the warning about the HTTPS. It works. Okay, so if you're at that point, there's one other thing we need to do before we enable WebAuthn. So we're going to go back to the data center layer. We're going to go to permissions, and under two-factor, for any user for which we want to enable WebAuthn, the first thing that we need to do is generate the alternate form of two-factor authentication, because once you turn on two-factor authentication for a user, two-factor authentication is required for that user. And if you turn on WebAuthn, it's fragile. There's a couple of different things that could go wrong. I already talked about it's easy to misconfigure. You could have the domain could expire, a certificate could lapse. You could have various little scenarios that cause it to be not possible for the user to log in. So you want to generate recovery keys. So I'm just going to do this with the root account, and the PAM account is the Linux account. So I'm going to do this with the root account. I'm going to copy my recovery keys. All right, now I've got my recovery keys copied to a safe place. Okay, done that. And then I'm also going to add the TOTP, the QR code, So this is going to be AJ's iPhone SE2. And I'm going to call this root at Pam MPLX. That's the way I want to name it. And I'll go ahead and do this. If I could get that out of the way so I could scan the QR code. There we go. And then as soon as it's added, it actually takes a little minute because it tries to look up the domain to try to find what URL it should use. Depending on, I'm using Authy right now. But then I can search Proxmox and it brings up the Proxmox logo. And then I just let it have the name that I want it to have, save it. And then there we go. Now it's going to show me the code. So I'm going to go ahead and put that code in. 635-202. And boom. Okay. So now that I have alternate methods, now I'll enable WebAuthn. So to enable WebAuthn, we go up to the data center layer and we go into options. And under options, there's WebAuthn settings. Now there's two ways to do this: single node or cluster. If you're just doing a single node and you know for certain you're never going to do a cluster, then you can click autofill and then you can change the name. The name is just a comment for you, and potentially, I don't know how they actually have it implemented, but it is something that gets passed through to passkey managers. So sometimes it'll show the friendly name, other times it'll only show the URL. But I could call this MPLX3 Lab 2. So I'm not sure how it handles special characters, so I'm just going to stick with spaces. I know spaces work. It should be a comment, so it shouldn't much matter, as long as you don't get too crazy with quotes or backticks or anything. Now, the origin is where you use, again, in the single node, single domain setting, or if you have your nodes proxied and load balanced, and you know that you have a single domain, then you can put the exact URL, starting with the https:// whatever it is, all the way up to the :8006, or if you have it proxied and you don't have that, then you don't have to worry about it. But this will lock it down. So with the ID is basically the parent. So if I had a child off of this, so let's say I had a.mplx3.lab2 and b.mplx3.lab2 then I would be allowed to use WebAuthn on those subdomains. If I lock down the origin, I can't do that. Now for me, my lab2 is just Proxmox. If I had other stuff on there, I might have set up instead pves.lab2, because whatever that ID domain is the parent. Hey, what's up, Ronnie? Is it safe to show the recovery keys? Yes, because I'm going to delete them right afterwards. This is just a test setup. So, where was I? The ID is the parent domain. Any child off of that domain, unless it's locked down by the origin, can use those WebAuthn keys. So in one setup where it's just one node, that's quite possibly what we want. But generally, we're going to do a cluster. And so in a cluster, we want a domain that's segmented to the application. So the domain, the parent ID, is the domain that represents the application. So whatever domain represents our cluster that we put our cluster nodes under, that's where we want that. That's what we want that ID to be. Now, you might have something else that could also use WebAuthn. And if you put it directly under whatever that ID is, so let's say I had Lab2 and I have pfSense. Now, I don't believe that pfSense currently supports WebAuthn, but if it did, then we would have a problem, because pfSense would have no way to get the registration process. So what we would have to do is we'd have to somehow manually copy over from the file where the WebAuthn details are stored on Proxmox, convert that to the right format for pfSense, and we'd have to share the public key information that way, because WebAuthn only gives the public key information once during the registration process, and that goes to the server side and is kept for validation on the server side. So that's the nuance there. Now, in this particular case, I actually want to set this up for a cluster. So I'm going to use lab2.therootcompany.com. Now, in the previous segment, we used duckdns. Why don't I use duckdns here? Well, the permissions, the authentication security basis for WebAuthn is the same as for cookies. And so it follows what's called the public suffix list, which is something that's embedded into browsers that basically says which sites are shared hosts and which are non-shared or owned hosts. And the default is that something is non-shared, that it's private. But duckdns is a public domain that anybody can get their username in front of. So if I was to use duckdns, then it would actually give me an error as I go through this step, because duckdns is in the public suffix list and the security policy does not allow it to be used as the ID for WebAuthn or a root for cookies, etc. So the important takeaways: name is a comment, ID, if you're doing just one node and you know you're not going to do anything else, you're not going to do a cluster, you know this is just a standalone thing, then you may want to set origin and ID to the same domain, with the origin being locked down with the https:// in front and the port name behind it. But if you're going to do a cluster, you need to have a domain off of which everything else can hang and be a sibling. So that's the way that we're going to do this. So you can see the domain up here, mplx3.lab2, and here we've got lab2.therootcompany.com. All right, I'm going to click OK on that, and then there we can see it there. And we'll go over where the files for these things are, because we're going to talk about how to unlock yourself if you mess this up and some of the gotchas. So with that, now we can go down. Again, we're in data center. We're going down to permissions, and we're going down to two-factor. We've already been here before because we added these alternate two-factor methods. Now we're going to add our primary two-factor method that we want, the WebAuthn. And so before you do this, I should also say, make sure that you can SSH into the system just in case something goes wrong between all three of these and you don't want to lose access to it. So you should still be able to SSH in either via keys or by password as root into the box. But we'll go ahead, and I'm calling this one AJ's iCloud passkey. Actually, I'm going to call it roots because the passkey managers generally key off of two things: the domain and the username. And so you can have multiple passkeys based on those two things. Now, if it's a hardware device like the Yubico key, let me see where I've got that. The hardware device. So here's a Yubico key. This will only store a certain number. It can be more restricted. But when you're dealing with something like iCloud, Google Sync, Chromium Sync, that you're pretty much unlimited on. So I'll go ahead and click register, and it's going to pop up. And in this case, I'm getting the Chromium prompt for storing the passkey in the browser and then using the browser sync method. So in this case, it'd be Brave Sync. So I'm going to click save another way, and then that pops up and gives me iCloud, which is what I typically prefer, just because Apple makes the UI less nice when you're using the browser sync. They give a different dialogue for basically no reason. The iCloud sync dialogue is just nicer, but I can add multiple. In fact, I'll do that just to show. So I'm not going to do the hardware because, like I said, hardware is limited. So I don't like to put test accounts on my hardware, because then I have to use a special tool to go in and delete the test accounts to make more room if I were to run out, because it is limited. I think you only get 200 accounts or so. Anyway, so here we go. Go ahead, do the Touch ID bit. Boom. All right, there we are, and I've got the WebAuthn. Now, technically, I think that we can add multiple TOTPs. We can only add one recovery key. User already has recovery keys. We'd have to delete them to add more. And we can add multiple WebAuthn. Now, the Yubico OTP, this is more legacy. If you've got it, then you'd use it, but I'm not going to cover that. So we're going back into WebAuthn and we're adding another one. And I'm going to call this one Roots Brave Sync. So then here, now I could choose Save Another Way. It's going to present me my options. Your Brave profile. This is what I was already using. That's the option that it already presented. So I can click, I could have clicked OK on the first one, or I can click OK here. Yeah, see, we're right back to it now. Continue. And then we get Apple's prompt for the browser passkey, which just looks different. It's more awkward. Sometimes it appears in the wrong place, whatever. So now I have these different authentication methods that I can use. And I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I can SSH in. Let me bring this over here just a second. All right. So I'll bring this over here so you can see. I've got SSH root at mplx3.lab2.therootcompany.com. Again, these are private IP addresses. So this is on my private network. And then I'm going to type in my password. All right. And that's a special password that I have just for test setup. So I'm not worried about that. Normally I turn off the mic when I type in a password, but I decided, you know, I just need a password that I use for all this test setup. So I use that. Anyway, so I can get in. So if I need to unlock myself, I can. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and log out. Boop. And then I'm going to log back in. And I've already got my password in the password manager. Now it's important that you double check the realm, because as you start adding users, most of the users are going to add in the Proxmox realm, but root is in the Linux realm. And some users, the super admins, you might create in the Linux realm rather than in the Proxmox realm. And if I wanted that to be the default, then I'd click save username and I could click login. Now I'm going to click cancel on this so we can see what the options are. I'm going to click cancel again. Okay, now it's coming back with an error. That's okay. So I just want to see what the options are. So I can use recovery key, I can use the Authenticator app, or I can use WebAuthn. So I'm going to use WebAuthn, and it's going to pop up, and it's using iCloud. Now, if I wanted to, I can click cancel, then it's going to give me the prompt. What do you want to do? You can either use your iCloud account, or you can use your Brave account. I'm going to go ahead and use the iCloud account. Puts that back here. Boom. Done. All right, now, this is a second factor. It is not a first factor. I really like it when we get to use WebAuthn as the first factor. In this case, we use the second factor. Now, we've got that all set up. We're fine and dandy, right? So let's go ahead and we're going to go into Realms. And we'll go into the PAM. That's the Linux realm. Let me double click on that. And do we want to require two-factor authentication? Of course we do. Okay, so Yubico Oath TOTP. Which one of these is WebAuthn? I don't know. Let's take a look at this one. Okay, that looks harmless enough. Yubico, API key. All right, I don't know anything about that, so that's not the right one. So I'm going to select this one. All right, so that way we can require it. And I'm guessing that Oath just covers part of what WebAuthn is, whatever. All right, so go ahead and click OK here. Now we require that we have two-factor authentication. Oopsie, maybe I made a mistake. Maybe I didn't understand what I was doing. Maybe I just locked myself out. So here we are, Linux PAM authentication. Try to go in, comes up, says, do you want to use WebAuthn? Yeah, of course I do. All right, so I go ahead and... So what just happened? Right now, I would consider this to be a bug. There should be an option in that list specifically for WebAuthn, although no, there shouldn't be. Sorry, let me rephrase that. There should be an option to allow WebAuthn. We don't want WebAuthn to be what we're restricting login to because of the other reasons that I mentioned. We have an exception. So I'm going to click cancel on this. We have an exception for recovery key. Recovery key operates above the law. We can always use recovery key regardless of what else we've used. And to show this, I hope that I'm not misspeaking on that. I may actually be misspeaking on that. I did not actually try this in this configuration. But we're going to go ahead and put in the recovery key there. Okay, it lets me in. So I didn't misspeak. Good. So that's a little quirk here, is that if you want to enforce 2FA and you want to allow WebAuthn currently in version 8.4.1, for whatever reason, you can't require TFA because it will only allow the authenticator app, even though, well, and recovery keys, even though it will prompt you with WebAuthn. So there's something in the configuration that's out of sorts in this version. I imagine that in the future, that'll probably get fixed. So that's the one caveat here, is that when you're using WebAuthn, you can't enforce two-factor authentication at the realm level unless you're using something else outside of it in order to do that. So if you have a Google workspace where you can set that in there, and then instead of using one of these realms, you're using that realm, well, then there you go. So with that, the last thing, I'm just going to double check my notes here. I think we kind of covered it all. But the last thing I wanted to go over was, actually, there's two more things I want to go over. One is auditing, and the other is anti-lockout. Let's go over anti-lockout first. All right, so I'm gonna, this is a forum post that I created in the Proxmox forums. I'm going to bring that over here, and we're just going to take a look at it for a moment. And all of this information that I've gone over here is in this forum post, as well as the troubleshooting steps we're about to go over and the auditing. So if you forget any of this, you can go there, and there's also some links to the documentation as well. I think, did I put the link into the, there is also a chapter. Let me go ahead and link that over here real quick. There is a chapter on PVE which is Proxmox VE user management. I'm going to paste that link here too, so you've got that. So where are all the places that are touched by this? There are two main places that things could go wrong, because remember, we have to have the HTTPS certificates. So there could be some sort of misconfiguration with HTTPS certificates, particularly if they expired. Or there's the two-factor authentication, which is at multiple levels. So let's go through each of these files. We'll go through data center, TFA. We won't look at the SSL certs, but we'll go through the node config. And yeah, those four files, data center, domains, TFA, and node config. So you can see what that looks like and how to get the escape hatch. And before I go into that, though, there is one thing that we should just cover very briefly, because it's very simple. If you, as root, have access, but another user is logged out, let me go back to where was our, there we are. Let me go back to this. What you can do is PVE user TFA, and notice I was able to use tab to get these to autocomplete, unlock, and then we give the username. So I would be interested to see if the username autocompletes as well. Yeah, the username autocompletes as well. That's pretty awesome. I always like to put quotes around things that are arbitrary, though, to distinguish them from commands. So if we needed to unlock, say somebody, they used the wrong authenticator. They got two Proxmox authenticators in their authenticator app, and they used the wrong one several times, thinking, what's wrong? Let me close the app. Let me open it. Let me refresh the page, whatever. There's a certain point, I think it's 8, at which it'll get locked. So if that were to get locked, the happy path is you can use the user management tool to unlock it. However, if things go particularly wrong, you want to be able to go into Etsy PVE database, or sorry, data center. I can open this up, and then down at the bottom, you can see WebAuthn is enabled. So you can edit this. If you want to edit it, you can just get rid of it if you want to get rid of it. If you want to unset WebAuthn, the only way to unset it entirely is to go into this file and delete it. So that's one of the places where WebAuthn config exists. That is, don't mind all of my comments up above. That's from the notes section that I was using I'll show that real quick. That's right here. So they basically use a kind of a front matter hack on that. But let's go back down to options. So this line right here, that's what we just looked at. Let's go to the next file. The next file that I want to take a look at is Etsy PVE priv TFA. Now note all of these things that are under Etsy PVE, they're all part of PCM. Let me say this right. PMX CFS. There we go. PMX, Proxmox, CFS cluster file system. Everything under here is mounted there, which is also in a database file that you will hopefully never need to access. It's sometimes useful for debugging, but other than seeing the certificates, I don't think there's anything that they would use it for in this case. But it's basically a copy of all the files under Etsy PVE with the parent-child tree relationship. I'm not going to go over that right now, but we will later. Anyway, so you've got this TFA config, and then here, I don't know if we're allowed to put the new lines in here. I imagine that we are, but let me just, I've installed JQ on here. Let me just cat this out with JQ, or I suppose I could just use it as input to JQ so that you can see what this looks like. So we got root users. TFA config has a list of users. It's got root. It's got the different methods for root. So we got TOTP. Here's the secret right there. Here's WebAuthn. This is the public key. There's the description. This is the ID that would actually go into the manager, I believe. Or maybe this one. No, this one's the ID that goes into the manager. They may be the same. But this is the ID that goes into the passkey manager if you ever needed to do some low-level debugging. They do use a non-standard format. There is a well-defined format for what this JSON is supposed to look like. I don't know why they chose to represent it in a custom format, but they did. So there's that. But it's pretty similar. You can tell how it maps to the standard JSON format pretty well. So this is public key. There's the X and Y values of the public key. Counter keeps track of how many times it's been used in some cases. I don't think that that's actually implemented in this implementation. But that is an anti-theft hack, an anti-copy hack. So, or hack is not the right word in this context. Security measure is that you increment every time that this is used, and if it gets copied where it shouldn't be, those increments will get out of place. But this did not increment, so I don't know if it's actually being used. Oh, here's the Brave sync one. So same thing for the Brave sync one, and then here's all of our recovery entries. And we could do that for multiple users. So all of that is stored in this tfa.cfg database, which is a JSON file. So if you need to do the nuclear recover option, you just delete that file. You just outright RM it, you'll be good to go. The next one that we wanted to talk about was domains, which relates to Acme, and then the node config. So let me open up domains here. Oh no, this one is not, sorry, domains is what Realms was once called, or at least internally was called. So domains.cfg is actually Realms. And so we're saying these are the realms. The one that's default is PAM. If we wanted to switch it when we have other users, we could switch that to Proxmox VE. But it's either default 0 or default 1. So if we copy this here and we do default 0, that's what would happen if we went into the setting and then checked it and unchecked it again. It would write that out. So there's domains, which is realms. And then the last one is under the node configuration. So that's Etsy PVE nodes, and then our node host name, and then config. And then here is where we see the Acme information that was under node system certificates. And then aside from that, so if we needed to remove this, we could, although typically you can do that from the web UI, no problem. That's not specifically related to lockout. But that is just one of those files. And then the other thing is going to be if we look in this folder that we have here, you can see PVE proxy SSL. I don't know why it's called PVE proxy, but this is the one that's Let's Encrypt. The one that's PVE SSL, you know, so there's a .key and a .pem file for both of these. This one is the one that's auto-generated. It's the, they kind of have the naming a little bit backwards from what I would call it. This is considered the custom certificate, but it's the certificate that you would get from an authoritative source like Let's Encrypt. This is the built-in generated certificate that you can use the regen command to regenerate. And of course, all of these things that we've shown can also be done from the command line in terms of creating an Acme account, ordering an Acme certificate, so on and so forth. Forcing a regen of the certificates, which particularly if you get your cluster out of sync, there's reasons that you might want to do that. And all of this, of course, should only be done on the node. I'm doing it on a test node that's not actually in the cluster. All of this stuff you would want to do either on your primary node before you create the cluster, or on any node once you've created the cluster and the cluster is in good health. So that covers all of the how we unlock ourselves out. And remember that domains, if I were to go into here, this is where TFA would have been set. So actually, let me go back and set that just so you can see. So let's go back into permissions under realms, which they call domains in the config file. If I were to go to require TFA under either of them, doesn't matter, and select it, hit OK. Then when I go back into this file, you can see type equals oath. So I can get rid of that to unlock myself, if that was the mistake that I made. Okay. Now with all of that out of the way, the last piece here is how do we audit this? And then in the next segment, we'll cover users, roles, permissions, groups, resources. And we might actually have to push resources off, but let me go into here again. Oh, no, it wasn't there. Oh, it is. It's right here. So again, this is the link that I already put in there. For auditing, there is one thing that I forgot to mention. It's just important to know so that you don't get confused by it. There is a spec for WebAuthn origins where you specify a well-known WebAuthn, and there's even an error message related to that. However, currently, it's not implemented. Either on, this is something that would be done on the browser side, and there may be, I have to think about this for a second. It may be that it allows you to specify a domain that is not a child of the ID. That might be when it's used. I need to double check on that. But in this configuration, this file is not used, so you don't need to set it up. If I come to the understanding of where it is used, I have set it up. I'll provide instructions for putting that together using a caddy, very similar to what we've done. I don't want to do it. I would not recommend doing it if you don't have to do it, because then you have something that you have to float HA among the cluster, and then you have to have your DNS plugin key stored in yet another place, and so on. Anyway, so audit logs. So there's basically 3 places where you can check for errors, 2 of which count as the actual audit logs. So first of all, in our web inspector, there are sometimes more details. If you get an error when you're going through the setup or the login process, if you hit Option Command I, there's a chance that you will be able to see either in the console or in the network tab, you'll be able to see additional errors that might clue you in to what's going on a little bit better. So I'm going to go ahead and close that out. And every time you refresh the page, that clears out. You can make it persist, but I'm not going to go into the whole web development strategy on this. Just want to let you know that sometimes that's useful when the error message might be obscured or not surfacing properly in the UI, or there's just a little bit more detail there. The second thing that you've got is journal D. So auth.log in Debian 12, that's bookworm, so Proxmox 8 point whatever, and maybe in 7 as well, I don't remember. The auth.log is replaced by journal D. So a lot of stuff that went into syslog and auth.log and some of the other logs, I don't know how long it's been, but it is now in journal D. So if you want to find authentication attempts, what's passing, what's failing, etc., I'm just going to copy this. We're going to go over into the shell. So down at the node level, we're going to go into shell. And one other thing, well, we'll talk about this when we talk about users, but I'm logged into the shell automatically because I'm using a PAM account and I have privileges to it. You don't always get that. But journal control since 10 minutes ago, grep authlog. Let's make this a little bit longer, 20 minutes ago. So here we can see all of the attempts that have happened, either successful or failure. So there's the failure that we had. So we logged in, logged out, logged in, logged out, logged in, logged out. But there's the failure that we had, and there's the message about it. I have to double check on whether or not those failures show up by default in the notifications. We're also going to talk about notifications possibly in the segment that would have come before this, but is actually coming after this just because of the way that I've structured the information that I have. Oops. By the way, feel free to ask questions, make comments, anything. If anything was unclear, especially, I want to know that. If you've got any additional questions that I can answer for you, I want to help. Okay, so there's journal D. So this is on the back end. The web inspector is just on the front end stuff. You're not going to get privileged information there. And then we also have the PVE access log. And the thing to look for there, I need to actually update this. I put auth. I should put auth or ticket. So we're going to go back over here. And I'm going to, I probably should type this out so that you could, you know, get the feel of it as I'm typing, but we're going to grep-i auth in var log pve proxy access.log. And there's nothing in there. I believe that what this should have been is ticket, and particularly we're looking for post ticket. So we're looking for post dot star ticket slash ticket. Yeah. So if I did this one, there we go. So these ticket requests are, the ticket is basically the access token for the web UI. And so that shows us, let's see, do we get any failures here? I think the ticket, I don't remember the internals of how this works, but let's look for a 400 error real quick. Let's look for a 401. Do we have any in there? No. Okay, we do not. So this one is less useful, but it's letting you know where the API is being hit, either the JSON API or the web front-end API to get the ticket, which is the access token that's being used in the browser. So this means that it's creating one. It could just be renewing, could be creating it for a particular purpose. I'm not familiar with all the details of how that gets accessed. You can look that up in the documentation for more information. By the way, the documentation can be really, really helpful. So in some cases it's not, I didn't find the WebAuthn documentation to be particularly helpful, but in many cases, if you do get stuck, the documentation can be really helpful. So don't forget to hit the help button when it's there. So I'll show you an example of that. Well, you've seen it before, but often the help button is on the left side. So with that, we've covered everything that I had for you for this segment. Again, I'll stick around for a minute if you've got any questions. And then I am intending very shortly, within the next few minutes, to just run this again, but we're going to go over notifications. And then later this week, I'd like to go over users, permissions, roles, resources, pools, that system, and kind of show the interplay there and some of the differences. So again, this will end up being in the description as well as a pinned comment. I'm going to go ahead and put it in the live chat. Oh. Apparently, those didn't get silenced. Anyway. Well, I don't see any questions or comments. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and shut this down. I hope that was useful. If you liked it, consider liking a sub. I'm going to be putting this content... Oh, I forgot to do my little self-promo ad roll at the beginning. So I'm going to be putting this content on my personal channel, CoolAge86. There will be edited content that makes its way over to the Root Company on YouTube. We do Proxmox setups. If you are interested in having help, whether it's in sizing, whether it's in configuring, if it's training, would love to help you. You can check us out at therootcompany.com. There's not really much there other than go ahead and get in contact with us. But this YouTube series is in large part to help provide some free resources for people to answer common questions and get a better feel for how to make good decisions. And we hope that if you need the expertise, that you'll reach out and contact us. It's myself, a friend of mine that I work with, who's my partner in this, Ryan, and then occasionally there are a few other people that do help out, but we are the main two that are Root. So with that, y'all have a good one. Catch you later. Adios. Oh, I do see a comment. It just came in. Awesome videos on Proxmox. Thank you, Ronnie. Spread the word. I'll try to keep making them. And the goal with this is I'm going through all of the Proxmox training material through a first run. So we are authorized resellers. I am Proxmox certified. And I'm going through this material it's not a one-to-one with what the training material is, and it's not a replacement for certification. If you're going to become a Proxmox partner at any level, you will most likely either be required or simply greatly benefit from going through the certified training. The certified training is required for certain partner statuses. So the training that we're doing is not a replacement if you're becoming a Proxmox partner. But if you are looking to use Proxmox in your business, then the training material that we're putting together, which you're seeing the first draft of here, which sometimes have lots of mistakes as I'm figuring out what order should things be in, how should this be explained, in what context does this go, because there's the way that you do it when you're actually deploying it, which is different than the way that you do it and you teach it. But the training that we're doing here, we can be more selective in terms of provide you with, if we understand what your needs are, we can provide you with training modules that are balanced for those needs. So we're not giving you a full 32 hours of training in the package in order for you to have the pieces that you need for what your setup actually is. So we can pare that down and then work in the little special bits and golden nuggets for you. So anyway, that all said, thanks for watching. Thumbs up, sub if you want to, and I'll catch you later. Adios.